Well, Mike, in your line of work, water damage is a big issue. So if someone calls you for water damage, what do you do, and what is that process like?
Oh, well, basically, somebody would call me if it's a pipe breaking or a hot water heater breaking. As long as it's clean water, water damage would basically result if the material stays wet. Things don't usually get damaged just by getting wet. It's when they stay wet. And what does that mean? Well, as a homeowner, you could think that, okay, I vacuumed everything up and my carpet feels nice and dry, but that subfloor underneath could be wet, and that padding could still be wet, which means you'll find out in a couple months and you can never get rid of that musty smell, that okay, now it's a bigger problem. So if somebody would have been called in professionally to make sure it was cleaned and make sure they could test it to make sure it was really dry, you wouldn't have that problem in the future. So it's all about getting it dried as soon as possible, because this way it avoids bigger problems for the future.
Like mold, as you said. Now,
Correct.
so it sounds like it's really important to have somebody evaluate it, because, for instance, I've had water damage in my basement, and I know that it's difficult to kind of tell how extensive it is. So you have a way of kind of assessing that.
Yeah, there's different tools to use. There's different meters. The water meter to make sure you're testing it to make sure there's a dry standard. Okay, great, this is within the limits, it's considered dry, or it'll show you right on the scale that okay, it's definitely not dry, even though it feels dry. You can probe down into the wood, you can get down to the concrete and get to the subfloor to see what's down there. Is it really dry? And then also, when you're drying it with the dehumidifiers and air handlers, you can go back and test it at the same spots day after day, and then chart the results to make sure you're making progress and that it's really drying. Because it's got to get down to a certain standard just to ensure you're not going to have that problem in the future.
Okay, now one of the things you mentioned initially is you said if it's clean water. What about if it's not clean water?
If it's not clean water, it still needs to be dry, but now what happens, you're basically removing the material. They consider gray water, or if it's water that came in from the outside. Anytime it's a problem like that, you can't, like if it's a carpet, you can't just save that carpet now. Basically, you're cutting up the carpet and the pad and completely removing it, and then having to replace it in the future.
Okay.
Compared to if it was just wet and it was clean water from your hot water heater, depending upon how old it was and how long it was sitting there, there's a chance we could actually dry it out and save it.
Okay. Now your company is Stop of Chester County.
Yes.
Service team of professionals. And so if a customer has water damage in their home, they can call you. And my understanding is you can handle kind of the whole scope of the job, whether it's clean water, dirty water, and we'll talk in other segments, but I believe you can also rebuild if that's required. Is that correct?
Yes, we like to pride ourselves on being a one-stop shop. I know it's a term overly used a lot, but we'll come through and do the emergency work, which is the most important thing at that time, is making sure you do just enough to make sure everything is cleaned and dried. And then basically I'd be able to put a price together for how much it's going to cost to rebuild everything back to the way it was before there was a problem.
Okay, very good. www.stopofchestercounty.com.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.